Hey, Larken Rose here, and I figured out how to adjust the exposure on this stupid webcam so I don't look like the world is on fire in this video. Remember back in school days when they did tests that were multiple choice? You might be thinking, what on earth does this have to do with anything that matters? Don't worry, I'll get to that. That always struck me as kind of a lazy, stupid way to teach anybody. Because in the real world, if you have a problem you have to figure out, whether it's math-related or physics or anything else, the universe doesn't say, well, it's one of these solutions. One of these four things is the answer. So it's already just an artificial, weird, stupid way to teach anybody. Instead of saying, here's the problem, you all the way have to figure it out. The world doesn't hand you some options. I actually think a clever thing, I think I did this when a couple times I substituted. I don't remember if I did this. It was going to be part of the thing, is give a multiple choice question where none of the answers are right, to see if anybody can think outside the box and go, it's none of them. Because what people naturally do is they look at the four and go, well, it definitely isn't that one, probably isn't that one. Between those two, it seems more likely it would be this one, and then they guess. Well, you didn't really figure anything out. You just sort of had some general vague notion of what it kind of probably was, like if it's a math question. And then round it off. Well, that's not how science works. That's not how logic works. That's not how reality works. So it would be fun to do one where it isn't one of the answers, and see if anybody can say, okay, I see the question. The given answers are wrong. They're incomplete. Because that's training somebody's brain to think outside the box. And a whole lot of the way people think, they think in terms of, well, there's this opinion and there's that opinion. Which one of those is it going to be? It's like, well, it may be that, it may be that, it may be any one of 20 gajillion other things. And I see that in a bunch of different ways. Like, I'll mention evolution and get people arguing with me again. As I often point out, I can prove that the Richard Dawkins version of trying to explain evolution by random mutation and natural selection is utterly bonkers. It's just crappy logic. It's crappy science. That's nowhere near an explanation. Now, a lot of people, when they hear me say that, will say, so you don't believe in evolution? Because all they know is like creationist and the Dawkins flavor of, or Darwinist or whatever. They don't think, well, they don't think. That's sort of the problem. They don't think from scratch as if it's like, well, here's the evidence, how might we explain that? And, well, there's this explanation, yeah, but that doesn't work because of this. And there's this explanation which kind of explains some of it, but some of it doesn't match. Thinking people, if you explain, like, I don't think this explanation is complete at all, they don't say, well, then you must believe whatever the other guy who just disagreed with you believes. That's sort of multiple choice thinking. Instead of understanding what the person's saying, understanding why they're saying it, and then even if you disagree with them, at least know what you're disagreeing with. But the whole multiple choice mentality, obviously, some of you probably could have guessed that this is where I was going with this, overflows into politics. It's the foundation of the bogus game called democracy. If you went, instead of giving people two choices, or three if you want a choice that won't accomplish anything and is guaranteed to lose, and you say, pick these two, then they scream at each other about, my guy's better than your guy. If you went one at a time to each person in the U.S. and said, if there was going to be one person wielding political power over the whole country, who would you want it to be? Before the 1996 election, the number, back in my day, going back 18,000 years, 2006, kind of missed. 2016, I'm old, never mind. before Trump was elected the first time, before he ran for office, the number of people who would say, I think Donald Trump should be given that power, would be zero. And the number of people who say, I think Joe Biden should be given that power, would be zero. Nobody starting from scratch, if they were forming their own opinion independently and were asked who should wield political power, would have come up with either one of them. The only reason anybody ever supported either one of them is because the ruling class made it multiple choice. Well, you don't get to choose just anybody. We will give you the choices to choose from. And we're still going to pretend it's your choice, even though obviously it's not. We just ruled out 300 and some million choices you would have had and left you with two. Almost the two worst choices imaginable. But that's what the system feeds to you, and you get to decide, and you can feel like, I'm empowered and my vote is my voice, because between these two lying scumbag crooks, they let me press a button next to one or the other and then yell at my neighbor back and forth as we argue over which of these psychopaths we're going to cheer into power. But the fact that people think in those terms and they think in multiple choice it makes it absolutely meaningless. And that's a fine example, because of the 300 and some million choices they could have had. And then there's that choice of no one. Why the hell would I give anybody political power? But accepting the status premise, if somebody's going to sit on the proverbial throne, the idea that somebody had to choose their choices ahead of time, and that so few people even notice that, is kind of amazing. It's like, who do you want to be president? Well, who are the choices? Well, there's 8 billion of them. I guess there's only 300 million because the rules say you have to be a American to be president. But in fact, with age requirements and stuff, it's probably only 100 and some million choices. But don't worry, you don't have to think about anything, because we'll break it down to like 2, and you'll have 2 establishment institution parties that'll each put up their ridiculous puppet, and you can choose between those 2. And, there's actually there's an Alexis de Tocqueville quote, which goes, quote, "In the United States, the majority undertakes to supply a multitude of ready-made opinions for the use of individuals who are thus relieved from the necessity of forming opinions of their own." End quote. And that's not just about politics, it's about all sorts of things. And it's the multiple choice way of thinking that you approach reality. There you are inside your head, a human being with a functioning brain, presumably. And you approach reality and go, wow, I wonder what explains whatever it is you're wondering about today. Well, I see these 2 guys arguing about it. I'm going to pick which one of them I agree with. What if they're both wrong? Or what if one of them's pretty right about a lot of things, but also totally missing something else? And just to get in the mindset of multiple choice immediately makes you vulnerable to manipulation. And I mean, there could hardly be a more obvious example of when you point out, hey, the guy that you voted for and empowered, he's doing this evil crap. What do they always say? On the left, on the right, what do they always say? The other one would have been worse. It's that easy to dupe people to cheer for evil, because they have the multiple choice mindset that, well, I have to either worship that power happy psycho or worship that power happy psycho. What else could I possibly have done? Neither. You really can't comprehend and the truth is they really can't comprehend the possibility of not choosing either of those. It's like most kids in school, if like there's a multiple choice, the idea of saying none of these answers are right, I'm going to like scribble in here, all of these are wrong, here's the actual answer. How many students would do that? How many students would do that even if they kind of knew it was true? They're like, well, the answer is like 13, but none of these choices say 13. Well, either they go, well, it must have been one of the, like, I must have done something wrong because the authority said these are my choices. And that automatically limiting form of thought that isn't even thought, it's just the illusion of thought, is so disempowering because people can't think outside the box. And that's true in 8 gazillion different fields of thought, or fields of lack of thought, where people just argue back and forth like, do you agree with this guy or do you agree with that guy? And there's no nuance and there's no understanding of the positions either, even because when you, and this is something you'll see just all over the place in almost every topic. Do you agree with this guy or that guy? I think this guy's totally right and that guy's an idiot. Okay, why do you think he's right? Well, he's just right. Okay, if you, without looking it up on YouTube, if I ask you to explain something, can you do it? Like, that guy you said you agree with, do you actually understand what he said enough that you could explain it yourself? And, I mean, politics is another shining example. I totally believe with Trump, or agree with Trump, or I totally agree with Biden. Okay, what's his position on such and such? Well, I don't know. I'd have to... Well, how do you agree with something without knowing what it is, dumbass? And they don't. They're just sort of hitching their wagon to one clown or another to absolve themselves of the responsibility of having to think for themselves. They don't even know what they think. And a fairly humorous illustration of this that people will do all over the place is get a bunch of quotes and do man on the street interviews. And what do you think of it that Trump said this, blah, 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 or that Biden said this, blah, blah, blah. And they'll be, that is absolutely horrible. And that's a total outrage. And then you say, yeah, that was actually something Obama said. And you can see their brain short circuit because they don't think in terms of concept and like logical positions and philosophies. It's just, well, that's the guy I worship. So if you say that he said that, I'm going to go, rah, 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 he's right. And if I find out the other guy said it, my brain's going to explode because all I can comprehend is worship that guy and hate that guy, or worship that guy and hate that guy. And so, and yeah, you've probably seen that in both directions. It constantly works in both directions because nobody knows what their party believes because neither party believes anything. They change their position and their stated beliefs every 5 seconds to contradict themselves, to flip sides back and forth 18 times, to do whatever they think will get public support or get them more power or money or whatever at any given moment. Like the Republicans who were totally anti-war until Trump and his stooges want to blow up random boats in international waters. Now that's a valid target. Oh, shut up. Like if Obama had done that, you would have freaked out. And the funny thing is you see that constantly of people on both sides pointing out the hypocrisy. You didn't seem to have a problem with it when your guy did it. And both sides fail to notice, yeah, neither did you. You're pointing out their hypocrisy and yours at the same time because you condemned it when Obama did it. And now you're praising it when your guy does it. Just like their side praised it when Obama did it and is condemning it now that Trump's doing it. Because none of you have any principles. You just have multiple choice and you've made up your mind. It's this. Of these two bogus, insane, anti-human, destructive options, I chose this one and I'm going to stand behind my stupid choice that wasn't even my choice because I don't even understand that if somebody else gives you the choices allowed, it's not your choice. And it's true whether there's one choice or two. I've talked before about how, we can laugh at the Soviet Union. Well, they have elections. Like you can look up the Constitution of the Soviet Union. The people are allowed to vote. For Stalin, that's kind of a joke. That's of what use is the ability to vote if there's only one person to vote for? We can go, ha, 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 that's so silly. Oh, okay, well, we're much more enlightened where we let you vote for Stalin or a clone of Stalin. See, now it's choice. Now it's up to you. Now you're consenting. Now you're in charge. Now they're just representing you because they gave you two lying scumbag crooks to choose from. And, of course, we show this in Jones Plantation, that if you give them two choices of abuse of power happy masters, they suddenly imagine, well, that counts as being free. Or at least it counts as we're kind of sort of in charge because we get to choose. You didn't choose anything. They gave you multiple choice. All the choices they give you, all two usually, serve them and subjugate you. So it's like I flippantly say, do you want to get stomped on by the left jackboot or the right jackboot? We're going to let you decide which jackboot to have on your throat for the next 4 years. So that's like you being in charge. No, it isn't. That's multiple choice slavery. Which flavor of slavery do you prefer? Which flavor of subservience to political psychopaths would you like to choose from the menu today? And the fact that so few people seem capable of thinking outside of that is kind of amazing and kind of depressing. And it's, I don't think it's a direct result of, because there were multiple choice tests in school, but it very much goes along with that way of thinking. And the way of thinking that Alexis de Tocqueville is talking about is like, you have some opinions and you can like choose which one. You don't have to form your own. You don't have to start from scratch and actually think about some topic or start with the evidence and go, does that... And you can totally listen to other people's theories and go, well, there's the evidence and there's what that guy says. And, well, it seems to match this and this, but I'm not sure how that would match this. So few people can even do that, can even approach it with that mentality of, does this explain this? Like all the people, I'm pro-science and Richard Dawkins is totally right about evolution is just random mutation and natural selection. And I can point to literally 1,000 different examples that it is absolutely ridiculous, 1,000 examples in the animal kingdom where it is absolutely ridiculous to pretend that that's just the result of random mutation and natural selection. Yeah, but our doctrine said, I've already chosen in our multiple choice. It's either creation and God did it in a week or something, or the Dawkins version of evolution. And if you disagree with him, you don't believe in evolution. So, in case I have to explain this, yes, I believe in evolution. There's a ridiculous amount of evidence for evolution. The mechanism of evolution is way beyond my comprehending. I think it's way beyond anybody's comprehending. I know it's way the hell beyond the comprehension of the people who think, just random mutations happen and some lived and some died, and that explains all life on Earth. That is the most idiotic anti-science claim I have ever heard. But because most people see in terms of multiple choice, they also want the comfort of having already decided. They want to cling to that. No, that totally explains it all. Instead of saying what I say, which is there are things that work way beyond. I don't know what it is. I don't know what the mechanism is doing it, but I can absolutely prove that random mutation and natural selection by itself, both of those things happen, by the way, and both of those can obviously affect a gene pool and all that. But to pretend that those explain everything we see in the natural kingdom is utterly scientifically ridiculous. No, they don't. They come nowhere near that. But if I say that, watch how many people who imagine themselves to be scientific thinkers go, no, I already chose of the multiple choice. It wasn't creationism, so it was the other one. Instead of being able to look and say, wow, there's a lot about this stuff that makes sense. And like if you have a gene pool of deer running around, the ones that are slow and sickly, they're probably going to get eaten by the mountain lions. And then the remaining ones will be stronger and give birth to stronger offspring. Like, yeah, that totally happens. The analog drift within a gene pool. To be able to look at that and go, yeah, that part makes sense. Look at the evidence. Here's somebody's attempted explanation. Go, okay, that matches up with that. But then they say, and it also explains everything else in the entire animal kingdom. It's like, that's a pretty big leap. Does it actually? And then you look at the evidence and go, no, nowhere near. It's an absolutely ridiculous claim. Now, I don't even give a crap if you agree with me about that, which is why I don't. I don't know if I'll ever get around to making the animated video I want to make that proves that that's nowhere near a complete explanation. And it's ridiculous to pretend it is. But doesn't really matter. I can coexist with people who believe that. I can coexist with people who think the world was literally created in 7 days. Like, if you won't attack me, I won't attack you. Yeah, beyond that, there isn't that much we need to agree on. But if you just look the way people attach onto some opinion that they've decided they agree with when they don't even know what it is. Because if I ask them, well, wait, if you think that's how that happened, how would you explain this? And all the people who are so sure that Dawkins is totally right will go, I don't know, maybe I'll look it up. Well, then you didn't know. You didn't actually have an explanation for that or 1,000 other examples I could have given. You just wanted to believe that thing and wanted to believe it explained everything and thought you would do a shortcut and just believe that ready-made opinion because you kind of like the multiple choice. And by the way, most people do. Most students like the multiple choice because you don't really have to know what the hell you're doing to do pretty well on a multiple choice. If it's 4 choices and you're like, well, that one's obviously wrong and that one's obviously wrong, well, now I'm down to 50-50, even if I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I don't really know how to solve the problem, don't really know how to think that clearly. But I'm already pretty likely to get a 50-50 as long as I can find like 2 answers on each one that are like pretty obviously stupid. Well, that doesn't mean you knew how to solve half of the problems. It means you knew how to solve 0 of the problems. You just knew how to guess among several ready-made conclusions, but you have no freaking idea how to get to the conclusion yourself and figure it out. And again, I know I do this all the time, but I'm going to brag about my dad, who I think was like the most awesome teacher I ever met, precisely because he tried to get students to learn how to think. And instead of just pick one of these, which of these 4 answers is the answer? Not only that, but he wouldn't just go, well, here's the thing, here's the formula, here's the numbers you put in. He's like, here's the thing we're trying to figure out. Like if you're trying to figure out the volume of a bucket, and it's kind of cylindrical, but it's a little bit wider at the top than at the bottom, how might you go about that? Not even jumping to the explanation, because maybe it'll take a lot longer to get to that, because most people aren't just going to instinctively come up with calculus on their own. But people can start to talk about it and start to think, how do you solve that? And that approach, that entire mentality is so lacking, not just in like academics and math and physics and stuff with most people, but in every aspect of life. Most people don't know how to form their own opinion. They know how to listen to other opinions, most of which are either stupid or manipulative or intentionally dishonest, and pick one. You're still just a mental slave to whomever is handing you the choices. Because reality gives you infinite choices. What's the explanation for this? I might have to think about that. Oh, you don't have to think. It's one of these 4. And so, and of course, kids like the multiple choice thing because it's a lot easier and it requires less responsibility. There's less weight on you. Well, the test has already narrowed it down from an infinite number of possibilities to 4. Okay, well, you've ruled out infinity minus 4. That's a pretty good head start. Yes, I know infinity minus 4 is still infinity. That gets into some very weird math, and I'm not going there today. But you can see it in the way people talk, in the way they talk about all sorts of things. They don't really understand anything. And when you actually, either you become very knowledgeable in some particular field, it can be some little trivial weird thing or some earth-shattering discovery, whatever. When you actually learn a bunch, you often learn, the simplified version that most people have of this topic, it's missing a bunch. And I remember learning that like really young when I was really into dinosaurs and read a million books. And by the way, a bunch of the things in the old books have changed since then. Well, now we know it's this. Okay, but should I take your word for it? Because back then you said, well, now we know this about dinosaurs. And then you changed your mind. Like the Brontosaurus fiasco, which is this vague monstrosity. Basically, the short version is, even this is an oversimplification. The most famous dinosaur that everybody knew of, the Brontosaurus, didn't really exist. They had stuck like a apatosaur skull with a brachiosaur skeleton or diplodocus or something. I forget what they did, but they put together a skeleton with the wrong skull on it. Now, it was close enough that most people wouldn't have known the difference anyway. And so for most people, it's like, yeah, there was a brontosaurus or an apatosaur or whatever. It was close enough. There were things that looked just like what you think of when you think brontosaurus. It just, there was a technical screw up in one case of them putting the wrong skull on the wrong skeleton and pretending that was a species, and they've had to kind of fudge it after that and try to clear up that that mess. But I learned early on from reading 8 million things about dinosaurs, including different opinions and different ideas. Maybe they were this. There was a book called Dinosauria that, I think I got that right, that my parents got me. They got me a bunch of dinosaur books. And it was like, why are we just assuming a bunch of things about their color and their texture? Maybe they were way weirder. Maybe they were colored way weirder. Like birds and reptiles of today, they're not all just green and gray. Some of them are ridiculously colored and have feathers and stuff. So this book basically said, we're just sort of like, we're not at all claiming these are accurate, but this skeleton that we know of might have looked like this, not bland, generic gray big lizard. Might have had feathers, might have been brilliantly colored, like a hell of a lot of reptiles are, like a hell of a lot of birds are. Because birds are dinosaurs, if you haven't heard. I'm not going to get into that whole thing, but given that they're direct descendants of dinosaurs, that means they're dinosaurs, because they're still in the category. But so when I remember reading that book and thinking, wow, this is really cool, because it's somebody saying, we don't really know this stuff. Might have been this, might have been that. We don't know. Here's the stuff that's a pretty good guess. Here's the stuff that we're just wildly guessing because we don't know about it. And the thing I loved about that book is that it openly talked about like the things that we all know, the things we're pretty sure of, and the things we're just kind of guessing. And even the stuff we're pretty sure of, that changes from time to time. But people don't comprehend that at all if they just like, and I remember, this is why I brought this up in school. It's like, we're finally getting to talk about dinosaurs in science class. And that went on for about 5 seconds, and like half the thing that the teacher said were totally wrong, which I already knew because I'd read a bajillion different books on the subject. And I was like, wow. I mean, that was a good learning experience, because I realized this person's just reading out of a textbook, and the person who wrote the textbook doesn't really know what the hell they're talking about. Not only is it oversimplified, some of it's just totally wrong. And I was like, oh, that was over with. I was kind of hoping I might learn something in school, but in that particular topic, I was way ahead. And you probably have the same experience if you're actually really knowledgeable in some area. And you know that most people have a simplified, probably downright wrong view of the stuff that you actually understand. Whether it's about human anatomy or astronomy or whatever else. Like, yeah, there's lots of misconceptions about this and this and this. But whatever, like most people have this much knowledge in any given field, and it's usually half wrong or oversimplified or whatever. But at least realizing that that's where most people are is important, instead of deciding, well, I heard that guy say it, so it's right. The teacher said it, so it's right. The test said it's one of these 4, so it's one of those 4. Instead of saying it could be literally anything. And if you think from scratch, there are a bunch of things like government that immediately fall apart and are just utterly insane. And nobody would ever believe, nobody would ever conclude it. Nobody would ever sit down and go, how should people get along? Well, the first thing we need to do is take the worst people we can find and give them societal permission to violently rob and dominate the rest of us. But every single person who believes in government believes exactly that and votes for exactly that, because all of the choices they were given fit within that paradigm. None of them started from scratch to actually think things out. And you can kind of see the real world results of people thinking in multiple choice. The universe isn't multiple choice. You have to back up and learn to actually think from scratch, which is a tall order and Probably not going to happen very soon. But the good news, sort of depressing too, the good news is when lots of people start to hear of another multiple choice, which is don't have rulers, they will start to think about that as one of the options. Most people won't get there on their own. They won't philosophize about it or actually apply logic to evidence and reason things out. But if a bunch of people hear, oh, there's another answer on the multiple choice thing. Do you want this ruler, that ruler, no ruler? That's an option? To have no ruler? Huh. And then they'll at least be able to think about it when other people add that choice to it. But sadly, most people are not ever going to get there from scratch on their own as a result of like rational thought. They're only going to get there when other people add that as a possibility that they hear about and can then think about. Good grief.
You two are going to have a little contest to see who can win the hearts and minds of the human livestock out there.